Creating work planes in Autodesk Inventor is important for several reasons. Work planes allow designers to create sketches and features at specific locations within a part or assembly. They provide a reference plane for creating geometry, which gives designers the flexibility to develop complex shapes and features. They aid in alignment and positioning. They provide a means for complex geometry creation, and they may be used to assist in assembly design. This video will explore some of the ways work planes may be created in Autodesk Inventor. Having the ability to create a work plane is fundamental to modeling using Autodesk Inventor. Let's look at this a little bit more. We all know that when I want to create a new part, we're going to start with a two-dimensional sketch, and you can start on any one of the origin planes. For example, I can start on the XY plane, I can start on the XZ plane, and I can start on the YZ plane. Okay, but if I want to start on another plane, I need to create a work plane. So if we look at this cube, for example, let's say I wanted a work plane that was 1/2 inch above surface A. What you'll do is you'll use your work plane tool, select that surface, click and hold, and then drag your mouse up, and you'll see that it gives you the ability to create a work plane that's parallel to that plane but offset by some distance. So I can type in 0.50, enter, and now I have created a work plane that is parallel to surface A and 1/2 inch above. I also can make a work plane that is rotated through an edge and measured from a plane. So if I say I want to create a work plane, I can pick the edge that I want to rotate around, and then pick the surface that I want to measure from, and then it gives me the opportunity here to type in a distance. So I'm going to say -30, and now it's measuring in a negative direction, 30 degrees from surface A to create that work plane. And now that work plane is 30 degrees from surface A, and it goes through that corner between A and C. I can also create what we call a mid-plane. So if I wanted a plane that went right through the middle of this block, right through surface A and perpendicular to that surface, I can say I want to create a plane that is halfway between surface C, turn this around, and have surface E. So now you'll see that it created my work plane there that is halfway between surface C and surface E. The good thing about this is it truly is parametric. So if I go to my original sketch and change my distance here, you'll notice that when my block updates, the position of that work plane also updated so that it's still halfway between surface C and surface E. It also works if I want to make it angularly halfway between. So I can say I want a work plane that is halfway between surface C and surface B, and you'll see that it created a work plane that angularly is halfway between surface C and surface B. Now there's other things we can do as well. Let's look at a cylinder, for example. If I wanted to drill a hole through this cylinder, I could come up here and pick my hole, but notice that it's not going to allow me to pick that cylindrical surface to put a hole through there. In this case, I need to put a work plane on. So you'll expand your origin geometry so you can see your base planes. Go to the work plane tool and say I want a work plane that is parallel to YZ, for example, but out here on this edge. Click, and it creates a work plane that is parallel to that original one and tangent to that cylindrical surface. It becomes a little bit more complicated when you have something like a cone. Here I have a cone, and I want to be able to do the same thing. And you'd think that I would just come in here and say I want a plane, I want it parallel to this, but notice now when I try to pick the edge of that cone, it doesn't work. So what you have to have is some additional geometry. In this case, I'm going to simply look at the sketch. I'll right-click on that sketch, and I'll make it visible. Now I can use that line that I used to create this part and say that I want a plane that goes through that line and that cylindrical surface. And now I've created that work plane that way. And then you can simply come in here and turn off the visibility of the sketch, but the work plane will remain. You can look, if you drop this down, you can see there are several different ways to make work planes, some of which I haven't yet talked about. But let's show one more point of application. In this cylindrical cam, this surface is extruded to an angle. And you have to, in order to do an extrusion to an angle like this, because it's, obviously not parallel to the original, you've got to have a work plane to do that. So here's my part that I'm going to start with. I want to extrude this outer rim to, some cylindrical angle. All right. So in order to do this, we're going to create a new sketch that has some geometry in it that we can use to create our work plane. So I'll come in first and I'll say I want a new sketch, and I'm going to put it on the XY plane. I'll press F7. I'm going to change to construction geometry, and then I'm going to project the bottom of this part, and I'm also going to project that line right there. And the reason I'm doing that is because when I create my angle here, I want this to go from that corner, and I'm going to do it about 7.5 degrees here. Now, it's always a good idea to constrain your sketches, so I'm going to say let's give this a constraint between this point and that point there, and then I need a dimension between these two, and again, I'll make this about 7.5 degrees. This sketch is fully constrained. I can finish it. Now, in order to create my work plane, I want to say, okay, there's my surface that I want it to be going through. So I'll say my work plane. I'm going to pick, in this case, that XY plane here, and then I'll pick that angle. It gives me the opportunity to change the angle if I want. I'm going to leave it at 90 and say OK. So now I've created that work plane at an angle of 7.5 degrees. Now I can come in and I can extrude this outer rim. So I'll start a new sketch on that outer ring. I'm going to project that outer ring geometry, finish that sketch, and now I can extrude that outer ring to, I'm going to say as a there, and I'm going to say to, right here, that plane. Okay. And when I'm done with that plane, I will right click on the visibility of that and turn the visibility off. Let's see, right click on this. My right click in my mouth is not being very nice to me here. Turn my visibility off. And I can also turn the visibility of this sketch off. Now, it's not usually a good idea to have unconsumed sketches, but in this case, I needed it for that one purpose. So I could even come in here and I could say, rename this sketch plane 1. Just so that I know what it's there for and I don't accidentally get rid of it.